Don't leave. Please stay, Mom. His small hands clung to my coat like I was the only thing keeping him grounded, like if he let go, the world would take me away too. And the strangest part was, that was the first time I had ever seen him in my life. 2 hours earlier, I was sitting in my car outside a building I couldn't pronounce, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror and wondering if I had enough gas to make it back home if this interview turned out to be another dead end, my dashboard blinking low fuel like a quiet warning, my phone buzzing with a reminder that rent was 3 days late, and my daughter's voice still echoing in my head from that morning asking if we could have pancakes this weekend like we used to before. Everything got so tight. Before every dollar had a destination before I even earned it. I remember gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles pale, telling myself this was just another job, just another office, just another chance to keep things together for one more week. But the moment I stepped out of that car, something felt off, like the air itself was heavier, quieter, like the building in front of me wasn't meant for people like me. The glass doors opened without a sound, and inside, everything was polished marble and soft lighting. The kind that made you aware of every scuff on your shoes, every thread out of place on your coat. And the man at the front desk didn't smile, didn't greet me, just looked at me like he already knew exactly who I was and why I didn't belong there. Name, he said, flat, like it wasn't a question, and when I told him, he nodded once and gestured toward a private elevator behind him. No directions, no explanation, just silent permission to step deeper into something I didn't understand. The ride up felt longer than it should have, the quiet pressing in on me, my heartbeat louder than the hum of the elevator cables. And when the doors opened, I stepped into a hallway, so still it felt like time had slowed down just for me, like I had crossed into a different world without realizing it. The office at the end of the hall was already open, and he was there, standing by. The window like he owned not just the room, but everything beyond it, tall, still, composed in a way that made movement feel unnecessary, like the world adjusted itself around him instead. He didn't look up right away, didn't rush, didn't pretend, and when his eyes finally met mine, it wasn't curiosity I saw, it was calculation, like he was measuring something deeper than what I had written on my application, something I didn't even know how to explain. "You're late," he said, even though I wasn't, and my instinct was to apologize, to shrink, to make myself smaller the way I had learned to do in rooms that didn't want me. But something in his tone stopped me, made me straighten just enough to answer, "No, I'm right on time." A flicker of something crossed his face, not quite approval, not quite surprise, but enough to tell me this wasn't a normal interview, not even close. He didn't ask about my experience, didn't look at my resume, didn't offer a seat, just studied me for a long second before speaking again, his voice low, controlled, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "What would you do," he asked, "if everything you had left depended on one choice?" The question hit harder than it should have, like he had reached past the surface and grabbed something personal, something I kept buried under bills and responsibilities and quiet resilience. And before I could answer, before I could even decide what the right answer was, the door behind me burst open, fast, urgent, breaking the stillness in a way that made my heart jump. And I turned just in time to see a small boy run straight toward me like he already knew me, like he had been looking for me his entire life, his footsteps echoing across the floor, his breathing uneven, his eyes locked on mine with a kind of certainty I didn't understand, and before I could move, before I could think, he wrapped his arms around me and held on tight, like I was already his, like I had always been there, and in a voice so soft it barely carried, but somehow filled the entire room, he whispered, "Be my mom." The room did not move, but everything inside me did. My breath caught somewhere between confusion and something softer, something dangerous, as the boy's arms tightened around me like he was afraid I might disappear if he loosened his grip even an inch, and I froze because no one had ever held onto me like that before, not with that kind of quiet certainty, not like I was the answer to a question I had not even heard yet. And I did not know where to put my hands, did not know if I should comfort him or gently pull away, because none of this made sense, not the building, not the man watching us in silence, and definitely not the child, who had just chosen me without hesitation. "Luca," the man's voice cut through the moment, calm but firm, the kind of control that did not need to be raised to be obeyed, and the boy did not let go right away, just tightened his hold for one more second before slowly loosening his arms. But even then he stayed close, his small hand gripping the fabric of my sleeve like a quiet promise he was not ready to break. And I looked down at him, really looked this time, noticing the way his hair fell slightly out of place, the way his eyes searched mine like he was trying to confirm something only he could see. And there was no fear there, no hesitation, just recognition, and that made my chest ache in a way I could not explain. "I am sorry," I said automatically, my voice softer than I intended, unsure who I was apologizing to, him or the man across the room. But the man did not respond right away. He just watched, his gaze shifting between us like he was recalculating something. Like this moment had changed the equation in a way he had not planned for. And when he finally spoke, it was quieter than before, almost measured. "He does not do that," he said. Not to me exactly. More like he was stating a fact he was still trying to understand himself. And I swallowed, glancing back at the boy who still had not stepped away, his fingers now wrapped around mine without asking permission. And I should have pulled back, should have reminded myself that this was not my life, not my place. But I did not, because something about the way he held on felt right, and that scared me more than anything else in that room. "I think you have the wrong person," I managed, forcing myself to take a small step back, even though his hand followed mine like it belonged there. And I gently loosened his grip, careful, slow, like I was handling something fragile that could break if I moved too fast. And when his hand slipped away, the disappointment on his face hit me harder than it should have, sharper than logic allowed. "No," he said immediately, his voice small but certain, stepping closer again. "It is you." And I felt my defenses crack just a little, just enough to make this more complicated than it needed to be. "Luca," the man said again, this time with a subtle shift in tone, not harsh, but enough to make the boy pause. And he did, reluctantly, his eyes flicking up toward the man before returning to me, like he was waiting to see if I would leave now that I had the chance. And the silence that followed stretched just long enough to feel intentional, like a decision was being made without words. "Stay," the man said finally, and this time it was directed at me. Not a request, not even a suggestion, just a simple word delivered with quiet authority, and every instinct I had told me to walk out, to get back in my car, to return to the life I understood, the one where nothing was this complicated or this intense. But then I looked down at Luca again, at the way he was watching me like I was already part of something bigger than myself, and I hesitated, just for a second, just long enough for everything to shift. And in that second, I realized something I was not ready to admit, that maybe this was not just a job interview anymore, and maybe walking away would not be as easy as it should have been. The silence stretched just long enough to make my pulse feel too loud in my ears, and I realized I was still standing there like I had forgotten how to leave, like one word had rooted me in place, and I hated that. Hated how easily everything had shifted without my permission, because I was not someone who made impulsive decisions. I did not have that luxury, not with a daughter waiting for me at home, not with bills stacked on the kitchen counter like quiet reminders of every choice I could not afford to get wrong. And yet I was still here, in a place that did not make sense, looking at a man who did not need to explain himself and a child who had already decided I belonged. "I cannot stay," I said finally, forcing the words out before I could second-guess them, my voice steadier than I felt. And I reached for my bag like that would anchor me back to reality, like it would remind me who I was before I walked into this building. But Luca's eyes dropped the moment I said it, and the shift in his expression was immediate, like a light dimming in a room that had just started to feel warm. And that reaction hit deeper than it should have, deeper than logic allowed, because I had only known him for minutes, and still, I felt like I was letting him down. "You have not heard the offer," the man said, his tone unchanged, calm, controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something sharper, more deliberate, like he was no longer observing. He was engaging, and I looked up at him, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since I walked in, refusing to be intimidated even though every instinct told me I should be careful, very careful. "I came here for a job," I replied, choosing each word carefully. "Not whatever this is." His expression did not shift much, but I saw it, the smallest flicker of interest, like I had said something he did not expect, and he took a step closer, not enough to invade my space, just enough to make the distance between us feel intentional. "This is a job," he said, and the certainty in his voice made it sound less like an explanation and more like a fact that had already been decided. And I shook my head slightly, glancing toward the door for a brief second, calculating how quickly I could walk out without making this more complicated than it already was. But before I could move, Lucas stepped closer again, his small hand reaching for mine with hesitation this time, like he was not sure if I would let him, and that hesitation was what stopped me, not the man, not the building, but that single moment of uncertainty from a child who had been so sure just minutes ago. Please, he said quietly, not demanding, not insisting, just asking, and I felt something inside me soften in a way I had spent years trying to control, trying to protect, because softness did not pay rent, it did not fix problems, it did not keep life from falling apart. But it was there anyway, undeniable and inconvenient. You would be compensated, the man continued, his voice cutting through my thoughts with precise timing, like he knew exactly when to speak to tip the balance. Well enough that you would not have to worry about anything outside of this role. And that made me pause, really pause, because worry had been my constant companion for so long that the idea of not carrying it felt almost unreal, almost impossible, and I hated that it tempted me, hated that a part of me wanted to know what that would feel like, even for a moment. And what exactly is the role? I asked, my voice quieter now, less certain than before, and his answer came without hesitation, direct, unfiltered, like he had been waiting for me to ask the right question. You would take care of my son, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. And you would not leave when it becomes inconvenient. And something about the way he said it made it clear this was not just about schedules or responsibilities. This was about something deeper, something permanent, and I felt the weight of that settle over me, heavy and real, and for a second, I forgot about the building, the money, the man, and all I could focus on was the small hand still hovering near mine, waiting, hoping, and I realized I was no longer deciding whether to walk away from a job. I was deciding whether to step into something that could change everything. And that kind of decision does not come with a clear answer, only a feeling, and mine was already shifting before I could stop it. I should have said no. That was the only logical answer, the safe answer. The version of me that had survived every hard year should have turned around, walked out, and never looked back. But logic felt weaker than the quiet pull of a small hand waiting for mine, and that unsettled me more than anything. The man in front of me could have done, because I knew what it meant to be needed. I knew how dangerous that feeling could be when it came at the wrong time, in the wrong place, from the wrong people, and yet I still found myself hesitating, still standing there like I was already halfway into a decision I had not fully made. For how long? I asked, my voice quieter now, careful, like I was testing the ground before taking a step, and the man did not answer immediately, which told me the answer mattered more than I wanted it to. As long as he needs you, he said finally. And that was not a time frame. It was a commitment, open-ended, undefined, the kind that could stretch far beyond what I was prepared to give, and I felt my chest tighten slightly, because I did not do open-ended. I did not have the luxury of uncertainty. Every part of my life had structure, limits, boundaries that kept things from falling apart. I have a daughter, I said, the words coming out stronger than anything I had said so far, because that was my truth, my anchor, the one thing that did not shift no matter what else did. And for the first time, something in his expression changed, not surprise, not disapproval, just recognition, like that detail had adjusted something in his calculation. Then you understand? He replied, and that simple statement landed deeper than I expected, because he was not dismissing it. He was using it, placing it into the equation like it made his offer stronger instead of weaker, and I did not know how to feel about that. Understanding is not the same as agreeing, I said, holding his gaze, refusing to let this turn into something I could not control, and for a second, there was a shift in the room, subtle but real, like a line had been drawn and neither of us was willing to step back from it. You would not be asked to choose between them, he said, his voice steady, deliberate. Your daughter would be provided for as well. And there it was, the part that made this dangerous, not the building, not the power, but the offer itself, the way it reached directly into the part of my life that kept me up at night, the part that counted every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice, and quietly promised relief without asking for permission to matter. I should have resisted that, should have shut it down immediately, but instead I found myself asking the question I had not planned to ask. Why me? I said, and this time, it was not defensive, it was honest, because none of this made sense otherwise, and for the first time since I walked into that room, his answer was not immediate, his gaze shifting briefly, not away from me, but deeper, like he was choosing his words more carefully than before. Because he chose you, he said, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard, because it was not about qualifications, not about experience, not about anything I could list on paper. It was about a moment that neither of us could explain, and I felt something shift again, quieter this time, more internal, like a door opening just enough to let the possibility in. I looked down at Luca, who had not moved far, who was still watching me with that same quiet certainty, not pushing, not demanding, just waiting, and I realized that whatever decision I made next was not going to be small. It was not going to fit neatly into the life I had built. It was going to change it, reshape it in ways I could not predict, and that should have scared me enough to leave, but instead, it made me pause just a little longer, long enough for the question to become something else entirely. Not should I stay, but what happens if I do? I did not answer right away because the moment I said yes, even a soft yes, everything would shift into something real, something I could not undo with a simple apology or a quiet exit. And I had learned the hard way that every decision had a cost, especially the ones that looked too good on the surface, especially the ones that promised relief without showing the weight behind it. And yet standing there, with Luca watching me like I was already part of his world, and Alexander waiting like he already knew how this would end, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not fear, not pressure, but a quiet pull towards something I did not fully understand. I would need conditions, I said finally, my voice steady but careful, because if I was going to step into this, it would not be blindly, it would not be without boundaries, and for the first time, I saw a hint of approval in his expression, subtle but unmistakable, like I had just met a standard he had not expected me to reach. Name them, he said, simple, direct, like he was giving me the space to define my own terms, and that alone shifted something, because men like him did not usually offer control. They took it, and the fact that he was allowing me even this much made me pause just a second longer. My daughter comes first, I said, not as a request, not as a question, but as a rule that would not change, and I held his gaze to make sure he understood that, really understood it, and he nodded once without hesitation. She will, he replied, and there was no negotiation in his tone, just certainty, like he had already decided that part before I even spoke it out loud. I choose when I am off, I continued, pushing forward before I lost momentum, and I do not answer to anyone except you when it comes to Luca, because I had seen enough of complicated households to know that too many voices could break something that needed consistency, and for a brief second, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close, something that looked like respect. Agreed, he said, and the simplicity of it made my heart beat just a little faster, because this was happening, actually happening, and there was no confusion left in the room about that. I took a breath, steadying myself, aware that this next part mattered more than anything else. And if I decide this is not right for my family, I added, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. I walk away, no pressure, no consequences, and the room stilled again, not tense, not hostile, just focused, like this was the line that defined everything else, and Alexander did not answer immediately this time, his eyes holding mine with a weight that made it clear this was not a small request, not in his world, not in his rules, and for a moment I thought he might refuse, thought this was where everything would end, but then he nodded. Slowly, once, deliberate. If you walk away, he said, it will be your choice. And something in the way he said it told me that while the words were simple, the reality behind them was anything but it was enough. It had to be enough, because I could not stand here any longer without deciding one way or the other. I looked down at Luca again, and this time, when his hand lifted toward mine, I did not hesitate. I let him take it, his small fingers wrapping around mine like they had been waiting for permission, and the moment our hands connected, something settled inside me, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to quiet the noise just for a second. Okay, I said softly, the word leaving my lips before I could second-guess it, before I could measure every possible outcome. and the second it was out, the air in the room shifted, subtle but undeniable, like something had just locked into place. Luca's face lit up in a way that made my chest tighten, his grip on my hand firm and warm, and I realized then that whatever this was, whatever I had just agreed to, it was no longer just an opportunity or a risk. It was a beginning, and I had just stepped into it without knowing where it would lead, only that turning back would not be as simple as it used to be. The word yes did not echo out loud, but I felt it settle into the room like something permanent, like it had weight, like it had already started changing things before I even took my next breath, and Luca's hand tightened around mine, as if he understood that something important had just happened, even if he could not explain it. And for the first time since I walked into that building, the tension in his shoulders eased, just slightly, just enough for me to notice, and that alone made me realize how long he must have been holding something in before this moment. "You start today," Alexander said, his voice calm, not rushed, not celebratory, just certain, like there was no need to delay something that had already been decided. And I blinked once, processing that, because part of me had expected time, a transition, a chance to go home and think, to prepare, but that was not how this world worked, not his world, and I could feel it in the way everything moved, precise, immediate, intentional. "I need to pick up my daughter," I said quickly, grounding myself in something familiar, something that reminded me I still had control over parts of my life, and his response came just as quickly. "A car will take you," he replied, already turning slightly as if the logistics were being handled the moment I spoke, and that unsettled me again, not because it was wrong, but because it was effortless for him in a way it never had been for me. Lucas stayed close as we stepped out of the office, his hand still wrapped around mine, not tightly anymore, just enough to stay connected, and as we walked down the hallway, I became aware of the quiet around us again, the way people moved without speaking, the way doors opened before we reached them, like everything was designed to anticipate him, to adjust without question, and I wondered how long it would take before I stopped noticing that, before it became normal, or if it ever would. The elevator ride down felt different this time, less tense, more real, like I was no longer a visitor, but something else entirely, something not yet defined, and I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, my coat slightly wrinkled, my hair pulled back too quickly that morning, my face still carrying the exhaustion of a life that had not been easy, and I wondered what I looked like standing here next to a child who had just changed everything with a single sentence. "Do you really have a daughter?" Luca asked softly, his voice breaking the quiet in a way that felt careful, like he did not want to push too much, and I looked down at him, surprised by the question, but not by the curiosity behind it. "I do," I answered, my tone softening without effort. "Her name is Lily." And something in his expression shifted again, not sadness, not jealousy, just thought, like he was trying to understand where he fit into something that was still forming. "Will she come too?" he asked, and there it was, the part of this that I had not fully considered yet, not because I had avoided it, but because everything had happened too fast for me to think that far ahead. And I took a small breath before answering, choosing honesty because anything else would only complicate things later. "Yes," I said. "If I stay, she comes with me." And he nodded, slow, accepting, like that answer mattered but did not change the decision he had already made about me. When the doors opened, the air outside felt different, cooler, more familiar, and I realized how quickly I had been pulled into something that did not belong to my world, and how strange it felt to step back out, even for a moment, knowing I was about to return, not as a stranger, but as something else, something that did not yet have a name. And as the car door opened for us, I hesitated just a fraction of a second before stepping in, because deep down, I knew this was not just a ride to pick up my daughter. It was the first step into a life that would not look anything like the one I had just left behind. The car moved smoothly through the city, quiet and steady, but my mind was anything but, every passing block feeling like a countdown to something I could not fully name. And Lucas sat beside me without speaking, his small shoulder occasionally brushing mine, as if he needed that reminder that I was still there, that I had not changed my mind in the last 5 minutes, and I found myself glancing at him more than I expected, noticing the way he looked out the window like he was not really seeing anything, like his thoughts were somewhere else entirely, somewhere heavier than a child his age should have to carry. "What is she like?" he asked suddenly, his voice soft but clear, and it took me a second to realize he meant Lily, that he was already trying to understand her, to make space for her in a world that had only just started making space for me. She likes pancakes, I said, a small smile forming before I could stop it, and drawing, and she talks a lot when she is excited. And as I spoke, I felt something settle, something familiar, like saying her name out loud anchored me again, reminded me that no matter how far this situation stretched, my center did not change. Luca nodded slowly, absorbing that like it mattered, like every detail was important. And then he looked at me again, more directly this time. I do not talk a lot, he said, almost like a warning, almost like he was apologizing for something he had not done wrong, and I shook my head gently. That is okay, I replied, my voice softer now, more natural. You do not have to be like anyone else. And something in his expression shifted, small but real, like that answer had reached him in a place that had been waiting. The car turned onto my street, the familiar sight of worn sidewalks and closely packed buildings coming into view, and I felt the contrast immediately. The difference between this and where we had just come from, not just in appearance, but in feeling, in pace, in everything. And I wondered how those two worlds were supposed to fit together without breaking something in the process. This is where you live, Lucas said, not as a question, just an observation, and I nodded, watching his reaction carefully, expecting confusion, maybe discomfort, but there was none of that, just quiet curiosity, like he was taking it in without judgment, and that surprised me more than anything else that had happened today. When the car stopped, I hesitated for a brief second before opening the door, aware that once I stepped out, I was bringing this new reality into my old one, and there was no way to separate them anymore, no clean line between before and after. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and something cooking from another apartment, familiar, lived in, and I suddenly saw it through different eyes, wondering what it looked like to someone who had never needed to think about things like rent or broken appliances or stretching groceries through the week. But Luca walked beside me without hesitation, his steps quiet, his presence steady, like he was not out of place here at all. When I unlocked the door, Lily's voice came from inside almost immediately, bright and familiar, "Mom." And the sound of it hit me right in the chest, grounding me completely, reminding me why every decision I made mattered more than anything else. And as she ran toward me, her small arms wrapping around my waist with the kind of trust that never questioned, I felt Luca's hand slip into mine again, not pulling, not demanding, just holding on and in. That moment, standing between the two of them, I realized something I had not fully understood before, that this was not just about me stepping into their world or them stepping into mine. It was about whether I could become the bridge between two lives that had never been meant to meet, and whether I was strong enough to hold that together without losing myself in the process. Lily pulled back just enough to look up at me, her eyes bright and curious, completely unaware that the world had shifted in the last hour, completely trusting that whatever I brought through that door belonged there. And that kind of trust was both comforting and terrifying at the same time, because it meant I could not afford to get this wrong, not even a little. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with interest as she noticed Luca standing slightly behind me, still holding my hand like he was not ready to let go. And I felt both of them waiting in different ways, Lily expecting an answer, Luca waiting for confirmation that he was allowed to be here. "This is Luca," I said gently, stepping aside just enough to bring him into the space instead of keeping him on the edge of it. And for a second, neither of them moved, just looked at each other like they were trying to figure out how to begin something neither of them had planned. "Hi," Lily said first, because that was who she was, open, warm, always willing to step forward even when she did not fully understand the situation. And Luca nodded slightly, his grip on my hand loosening just enough for him to lift his other hand in a small, hesitant wave. "Hi," he replied, quieter, but steady, and I watched the exchange carefully, my heart tightening without warning, because this was the moment that mattered more than anything Alexander had said, more than the building, more than the offer. This was where everything either worked or fell apart. "Do you want to come in?" Lily added, stepping back like she was already making room for him. Like inclusion was the most natural thing in the world, and I felt something inside me shift again, softer this time, less uncertain, because whatever happened next, At least this part felt right. Luca looked at me briefly, like he was checking for permission, and when I gave a small nod, he stepped inside, his movements careful but not reluctant. And the moment he crossed that threshold, it felt like something invisible had changed, like two separate lives had just started overlapping in a way that could not be undone. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, not physically, but in the way space adjusts when new people enter it, when new energy fills the air, and I became aware of every detail. The worn couch, the small kitchen table, the drawings Lily had taped to the wall, all the pieces of our life that had always been enough, but now stood in contrast to everything I had just seen. "Do you like drawing?" Lily asked, already reaching for a stack of crayons on the table, and Luca hesitated for only a second before nodding, stepping closer, his attention shifting from me to her. And I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, because that small movement, that simple connection, felt like the first sign that maybe this could work, maybe this was not as impossible as it seemed. I moved toward the kitchen, more out of instinct than need, giving them space but staying close enough to watch, to listen, to make sure nothing felt forced. And as I leaned against the counter, I saw it. The way Luca's shoulders relaxed just slightly as Lily handed him a crayon. The way she started talking about her favorite colors without expecting him to respond right away. The way he listened without pulling away. And it was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost easy, and that was what made it powerful. For the first time since this began, I was not thinking about the risks or the unknowns or the weight of the decision I had just made. I was just watching two children sit at a small table, sharing something simple, something real, and I realized that sometimes the strongest connections do not announce themselves with big moments. They show up quietly, in the spaces where no one is trying too hard. And as I stood there, listening to Lily's voice fill the room and watching Luca stay instead of retreat, I understood that whatever came next, whatever challenges waited outside this door, this moment right here was the reason I had not walked away. The sound of crayons moving across paper filled the room in a quiet rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar, like something I had not realized was missing until it was suddenly there. And I stayed where I was for a moment longer, watching them, letting myself take it in without overthinking it, because overthinking had always been my default, my way of staying in control, my way of protecting what little stability I had built. But this felt different, softer, like something I did not need to guard against, at least not right now. Luca leaned slightly closer to the table, his focus fixed on the page in front of him, and Lily talked beside him like she always did, explaining things that did not need explaining, filling the silence without expecting anything in return, and I saw it clearly then. The way he listened, the way he stayed, not pulling away, not shutting down, just present, and that alone told me more than any words could have. My phone buzzed softly against the counter, breaking the moment just enough to pull me back, and when I glanced down, I saw his name, and something in my chest tightened again, not with fear, but with the weight of everything this represented, because he was not just a man in a building anymore. He was part of this now, part of what was unfolding in front of me, and I knew answering that call would connect the two worlds completely, without any distance left between them. I hesitated for half a second before picking up, turning slightly away but not far, because I did not want to leave the room, not even for a moment. "Yes," I said quietly, and his voice came through steady, controlled, just like before, but there was something else beneath it now, something less distant. "Is he still with you?" he asked, and I glanced back at Luca, who was now holding up his drawing for Lily to see, a small, tentative smile on his face that had not been there earlier, and that image settled something in me in a way I could not explain. "He is," I replied, my voice softer than before, less guarded, and there was a brief pause on the other end, not long, but noticeable, like he was processing something he had not expected to feel. "Good," he said finally. And for the first time, the word did not sound like an assessment. It sounded like relief, quiet but real. I leaned slightly against the counter, my eyes still on the two of them, and I realized I was no longer thinking about whether I had made the right decision. I was thinking about what came next, about how to make this work, not just for him, not just for me, but for them, because they were the ones who would feel it the most, the ones who would live inside whatever I built from this moment forward. "She likes him," I said without thinking, the observation slipping out naturally, and there was another pause, longer this time, before he responded. He likes her, he said, and there was something in his voice I had not heard before, something unguarded, something that did not belong to power or control or strategy, but to something much simpler, something human, and that surprised me more than anything else had today. I ended the call without needing to say more, because there was nothing else to say yet, not while everything was still unfolding in real time. And as I set the phone down, I took a slow breath, letting it out as I stepped back toward the table, toward them, toward the space that was already starting to feel different, fuller, like it was expanding to hold something new. Luca looked up as I approached, his expression searching mine for a second, like he needed confirmation that nothing had changed, and I gave him a small nod, a quiet reassurance without words, and his shoulders relaxed just enough for me to notice. Lily scooted slightly to make room for me without even thinking about it, like she had already decided I belonged there with them. And as I sat down between them, close enough to feel the warmth of both their small shoulders against mine, I understood something I had not been able to put into words before, something simple but undeniable, that I had not just stepped into their lives, they had stepped into mine too, and somewhere between the fear and the uncertainty and the weight of everything this decision carried, there was something else growing quietly, something steady, something that felt a lot like the beginning of a family, even if none of us were ready to say it out loud yet.